The real story. Horror. Only. At Mr. Scare.
I've always believed that stories are meant to be told. Some come from truth, others born from fear, and some crawl out of the static, whispering things that should never be heard. I built my career on telling stories, the late-night ghost tales, urban legends, and conspiracy theories that kept insomniacs and skeptics glued to their radios at ungodly hours. It was just a job, just entertainment, until that night. The night I received a package that changed everything. It arrived without warning. No return address, no markings. Just my name scrawled in uneven ink across a small, battered box. Inside was a cassette tape and a folded piece of paper with 6 words. Play this on air, if you dare. I should have tossed it, should have ignored it, like every other prank submission I got from the occasional listener who thought they were clever. But there was something about this, something that made the hair on my arms stand on end. No label on the tape, just a strip of old masking tape with the word "Listen" scratched onto it. The letters dug deep, almost like someone had carved them in a hurry. Still, this is what I do, I told myself. I slid the tape into the player and switched on the mic. The studio was quiet, save for the faint hum of the soundboard and the distant ticking of a clock mounted on the far wall. The place had an eerie stillness at this hour. Just me, the empty chairs, and the glowing red on-air light. Outside the soundproof window, the hallway was dark, the station deserted. Late-night radio had always felt like a ghost town. There was something oddly comforting about it, until now. Welcome to Midnight Frequencies, where the night is long and the truth is never far away. I'm Ethan Carter, your host, and tonight, we have something different, something unexpected. Someone sent me a tape. No name, no explanation, just a challenge. Play this on air, if you dare. And folks, you know me. I never back down from a good mystery, so let's give it a listen. With a click, the tape began to play. At first, nothing but static, the kind that hums low in the background, the sound of an empty frequency waiting to be filled. Then, faintly, a voice emerged. A woman's voice, soft, trembling. Please, someone. He's still looking for me. I don't have much time. I sat up straighter, my hand tightening around the microphone. Something about her tone. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't staged. It was real. The voice continued, more frantic now. If anyone hears this, please don't let him find me. I thought I escaped, but the signal. He follows the signal. Then, a loud burst of static. The studio lights flickered. My computer screens glitched, distorting into waves of color before snapping back to normal. And then, silence. My fingers hovered over the control panel. My pulse hammered in my ears. I'd played hundreds of eerie recordings before. I'd heard people confess their worst fears on air. But this felt different. Something was wrong. I glanced toward the studio window. The hallway outside was still dark, but for a moment, a brief fleeting moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting just out of sight. I shook off the feeling, blaming it on the uneasy atmosphere, the paranoia that came with working alone in a station where every sound seemed amplified. Then the phone rang, not the usual listener call-in line, the private studio line. I hesitated before answering. Hello? A deep rattling breath came through the receiver. And then, a whisper. You shouldn't have played it. The line cut off. I sat there, frozen, gripping the receiver like it could somehow protect me. I forced a dry swallow, pushing back the creeping dread in my chest. Maybe it was just a prank, a well-timed stunt from a listener who knew I'd bite. But then, The tape started playing again. I hadn't touched it, hadn't pressed rewind. The same voice, only this time, it spoke just 2 words. "He's here." I turned toward the studio window again. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone, or something, was standing just beyond the glass. I couldn't stay calm after that broadcast. I didn't even leave the studio right away. I just sat there, staring at the darkened hallway outside the glass, waiting for something to move again. But nothing did. When I finally worked up the nerve to leave, the cold air outside felt suffocating rather than refreshing. My car was the only one in the parking lot, and every step toward it felt like I was being watched. I chalked it up to paranoia, sleep deprivation. I had just played a creepy tape. My mind was primed for fear. That was all. At least, that's what I told myself, until my phone rang again. Not my work phone, my personal phone. I pulled it from my pocket, hesitating as I looked at the screen. No caller ID. I pressed answer, my breath catching. "Hello?" Silence. Then, a faint crackling sound, like an old radio tuning in. And then the voice, the same one from the tape, the woman's voice. "He knows you heard me." The line went dead. I just stood there, gripping my phone, staring at the blackened screen. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I turned, scanning the parking lot. Empty. No movement. No sign of anyone. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel. I needed to go home, get some sleep, clear my head. But as I started the engine, my radio crackled to life. Not on the station I worked for, not on any station at all. Through the static, the voice whispered again, "You let him in." And then something even worse. A faint breath, not from the radio, but from the back seat. I turned sharply, my heart slamming against my ribs. The back seat was empty, or at least it looked empty. I didn't wait to check again. I threw the car into gear and sped out of the parking lot, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The static on the radio didn't stop, even when I turned the dial, even when I shut it off. I drove through the city aimlessly, desperate to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. But no matter how many turns I made, how fast I went, I couldn't outrun the whisper in my ears. "He follows the signal." I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself driving aimlessly through the dimly lit streets, the weight of the night pressing against my skull. The static in my ears had faded, but the unease hadn't. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows of my back seat. Every rational thought told me to stop, to shake it off, to go home and get some sleep. But I knew deep down that if I did, I wouldn't be able to close my eyes. Not after what I'd heard. I needed answers, and there was only one place I could start. The radio station's archives weren't exactly well maintained. A dusty back room filled with half-labeled boxes, broken equipment, and stacks of old cassette tapes long forgotten by time. It smelled of mildew and neglect. Hardly anyone came back here anymore, except me, now. I clicked on the small desk lamp in the corner, its weak yellow glow barely illuminating the room. I wasn't sure what I was even looking for, but if that voice on the tape was real, if she had been calling for help, then maybe, just maybe, there was a record of her somewhere. I started with the oldest tapes first, ones labeled with handwritten call signs from shows long before mine. Midnight Frequencies had been around for decades, passing through different hands, different voices. But the frequency, the signal, remained the same. And that was what scared me the most. An hour into searching, I found something. A cassette labeled 103.7 FM, May 1998. It was brittle with age. The ink faded, but the moment I held it, I felt an odd sense of recognition. the same unease that had settled in my gut when I received that anonymous package. I slid the tape into an old player, pressing play. At first, just silence. Then, static, the familiar low hum of dead air. Then, a voice, a woman's voice. If anyone is hearing this, please, don't let it find me. I stopped breathing. The voice was eerily familiar, almost identical to the one from the tape I had played on air. I let it continue. It moves through the signal. It follows whoever listens. If you've heard this, it's already watching. A high-pitched whine cut through the audio, like microphone feedback, then a loud thud, like something falling, or someone, then nothing. Dead air. I sat there frozen, the tape still spinning but no sound coming through. My fingers hovered over the stop button, but before I could press it, a whisper crackled through the speaker. "Ethan." The voice said my name. The tape wasn't a recording from decades ago. It was talking to me now. I slammed the stop button, my breath ragged, heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the tape deck, half expecting it to start playing again on its own. What the hell was this? I scrambled through more boxes, desperate to find something, anything that could explain what was happening. And that's when I found it. A yellowed newspaper clipping, buried beneath old station memos. 1998, local radio host vanishes after playing mysterious tape. I scanned the article. The name jumped out at me like a scream in the dark. Rachel Moore, the same name from the missing persons case, the same voice on the tape, the same voice I had played on air. She had disappeared 10 years ago. And now somehow, she was speaking through the signal. I leaned back in my chair, my head spinning. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe someone had spliced new audio into the tape as a prank. But then why did it feel so real? Why did I feel like something was watching me, even now? I pulled out my phone and searched Rachel Moore's name. The first few results were old missing person reports, vague articles about how she had left work one night and simply vanished. No evidence, no leads, just gone. I scrolled further, past forgotten articles and archived police reports, until I found something that made my breath catch in my throat. A forum thread. Title: Has anyone heard the Rachel Moore tape? My hands shook as I clicked the link. The thread was years old. Dozens of users had posted, claiming to have heard whispers about the tape, rumors of a cursed frequency. Some said they had known someone who worked at a radio station, who disappeared after playing an old recording. But one comment stood out among the rest. A user named DeadSignal1137 had written, "If you played the tape, it's already too late." I swallowed hard. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to know more, but before I could type a response, the screen flickered. The forum page vanished. A new message popped up, filling the screen. A single sentence in bold white text. "Stop searching. He's listening." My heart stopped. The cursor on my screen moved on its own. It erased the message, then typed something else. "Turn on the radio." I hesitated, my pulse hammering. But something, some unseen force, made me reach for the dial. The moment I turned it on, static filled the room. Then, through the white noise, a voice. A deep, hollow whisper. "Ethan, we've been waiting for you." I didn't turn the radio off. Not right away. The moment I twisted the dial, static poured into the room, thick and suffocating, like a blanket of white noise pressing against my ears. My fingers hovered over the volume knob, my breath shallow. The signal wavered, shifting between distorted frequencies. Then it stabilized, and through the crackling hum, the voice returned. "Ethan, we've been waiting for you." A cold weight settled in my chest. I sat frozen, unable to breathe, unable to react. The voice wasn't coming from a recording. It wasn't an old tape. It was live. I reached for my phone, desperate to record, to document whatever this was. But before I could open the app, my screen glitched, the pixels distorting, flickering with black lines and white static. Then, one by one, the words on my screen vanished. The forum, the browser, even my home screen. Everything erased, as if it had never existed. And then, a single word reappeared. Listen. A cold, creeping dread settled into my bones. I pushed away from my desk, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The air in the archive room felt heavier now, charged with something unseen. My eyes darted toward the old radio sitting on the shelf near the door. The static from the speaker pulsed in uneven waves, as though something was breathing through the signal. Then, beneath the noise, I heard it. A whisper. You've heard it now. I staggered back, knocking over a stack of cassette tapes. They clattered to the floor, the sound shattering the eerie quiet. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at the radio, its dull glow casting long shadows against the wall. The whisper had come through the signal, not through the station, through something else. I wasn't alone in the station. I felt it before I saw it. A subtle shift in the air, the way the dim fluorescent lights overhead seemed to flicker out of sync. My skin prickled as I turned toward the archive room door, half expecting to see a shadow standing there. But the hallway was empty, or so I thought. Then from just beyond the doorway came the softest sound. A footstep. My breath hitched. I took a slow, deliberate step back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The station was supposed to be empty. The security guard, Alan, had finished his rounds hours ago. I had been alone all night. Hadn't I? Another footstep, this time closer. The radio hissed with static, and then, through the signal, through the suffocating hum of white noise, came a voice. You shouldn't have listened. I didn't run. Not yet. Instead, I turned toward the computer screen, half expecting the message to return. But the screen was dead black. No cursor. No system crash message. Nothing. Just a void staring back at me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A reflection. Not mine. A figure standing behind me, barely visible in the dim glow of the radio light. My body seized up. Every instinct screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. It was watching me. Then the whisper came again, directly behind my ear. You let him in. I spun around, my chair crashing against the desk. Nothing. The room was empty, but something had changed. The radio, which had been glowing with a weak yellow light, was now pitch black, as if it had never been turned on at all. And on the table next to it, a photograph. I hesitated before reaching for it. The edges were curled, the ink slightly faded, but I recognized the image immediately. Rachel Moore. She was standing in a recording booth, smiling. But it wasn't just any recording booth. It was my booth. The station, the microphone. The setup was identical, and scrawled in red ink at the bottom of the photograph was a message. We see you. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't put this here. I stepped back, my hands trembling. I needed to get out, needed to leave. But as I turned toward the door, the lights went out completely. And in the darkness, something moved. I heard the sound of shifting fabric, the almost imperceptible creak of weight against the floor. It was close, too close. A deep, static-laced breath brushed against my ear. I opened my mouth to scream, then everything went black. I woke up somewhere else. The first thing I felt was the seat beneath me. Leather, worn, and too familiar. I was in my car. The night air pressed against the windows, thick and humid, carrying the distant hum of city traffic. I sat there, slumped in the driver's seat, my pulse sluggish and disoriented. I don't remember getting here. One moment, I had been in the archive room, the photograph, the whisper, the door slamming shut. And now I was here. A cold sweat prickled along my spine as I scanned my surroundings. My keys were still in the ignition, though I didn't remember turning the car on. The seatbelt was fastened across my chest. Had I done that? Then, something on the passenger seat caught my eye. A cassette tape. I swallowed hard. It was unlabeled, its plastic casing old and scratched. My fingers hesitated before picking it up. The weight of it felt wrong in my hand, like it didn't belong in this world. Then my radio turned on. By itself. The dial spun wildly, skipping stations, until it landed, 103.7 FM. And through the static, a voice. Not Rachel's, not mine, someone else. We never stopped broadcasting. I slammed my hand against the radio, twisting the dial, turning it off. The silence that followed was almost worse, because in that silence, I heard something else. Breathing. Not my own. A slow, measured inhale, a rasping exhale. I turned my head, inch by inch, toward the passenger seat. Empty. But the air felt different, thicker, as if someone was still there, still watching. I turned back to the windshield, swallowing the lump in my throat. Get home. Now. The drive was a blur. Streetlights smeared through my vision, and every intersection felt like it stretched longer than it should. I kept expecting to see someone in my rearview mirror, some shadowy figure perched in the back seat, but every time I checked, nothing. And yet the feeling never left. Something had followed me. By the time I reached my apartment, my body felt like it was moving on autopilot. Lock the door, check the windows, turn on all the lights. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, but my apartment felt wrong, like I had just walked into somewhere else entirely. The silence wasn't normal. It was too silent, like a recording with all the background noise stripped out. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the pipes, gone. And then, from the corner of the room, my television turned on. Static. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Then, a face flickered on the screen. Distorted, unfinished. Mouths that didn't align. Eyes that weren't fully formed. A glitch in human shape. And a voice. You're part of the broadcast now. I grabbed the remote, pressing every button. But the image wouldn't go away. The figure's mouth moved, but the words didn't match the motion, as if I was watching something struggling to exist in real time. Then suddenly it stopped. The image froze, and my phone rang. The screen flashed, no caller ID. I hesitated. I should have ignored it. But my hands moved before I could think, swiping to answer. I pressed the phone to my ear, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Then a voice, but not from the phone, from the TV. We see you, Ethan. The call cut out. The screen went black. But the silence in my apartment was no longer empty, because now I could hear something else. Something moving in the next room. The sound in the next room wasn't just movement. It was shuffling. A slow, deliberate drag of footsteps across my hardwood floor. I held my breath, my fingers tightening around the phone still clutched in my hand. My mind raced through possibilities. An intruder, a trick of my exhausted brain, or something else entirely. The silence stretched thin, suffocating. I forced myself to take a step forward, creeping toward the doorway that led to the living room. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat louder than the next. I reached out, gripping the edge of the door frame. Then, the television flickered back on, static. I turned my head slowly, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But I didn't, because the screen had changed. It wasn't just distortion anymore. It wasn't a glitch. It was footage. A dimly lit room cluttered with old equipment, microphones, reel-to-reel recorders, an ancient mixing board covered in dust, a radio station. But not just any station, my station. 103.7 FM. I knew it by the placement of the furniture, the markings on the old desk in the corner. But the most chilling detail wasn't the familiarity. It was the person sitting at the microphone. Rachel Moore. She was there, alive. Or at least, she looked alive. Her expression was vacant, her eyes dull. But her lips moved, whispering something too low for me to hear. Then, as if she had sensed me watching, her head snapped up. She stared directly into the camera, directly at me. I took a step back, my foot catching on the rug, nearly tripping. My breathing was too loud, too uneven. This wasn't possible. Rachel Moore had been missing for 10 years. The screen flickered. Her lips parted, and this time, I heard her clearly. "Ethan, don't let them in." The screen cut to black. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. The television remained off now, but the silence in my apartment felt too deep, as if the very air around me was waiting for my reaction. I needed to get out. I grabbed my keys, shoving them into my pocket as I made my way toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed again. No caller ID. I swallowed hard. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then, against all logic, I answered. The line was filled with static. No voice, no breathing, just the distant hum of a transmission barely clinging to existence. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. "Who are you?" The static hissed, warping into something almost like words. And then I heard it. A whisper. "Look outside." Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to, but I did. I turned, stepping toward the window, my breath fogging against the glass as I peered down into the dimly lit street below. And I saw him. A man stood directly beneath the street lamp. Still. Too still. His face was hidden beneath the brim of an old baseball cap, his hands tucked into the pockets of a dark coat. But even from this distance I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. My fingers dug into the windowsill. I wanted to believe he was just some random passerby, someone who had nothing to do with this. But deep down, I knew better. The man lifted his hand, and slowly he waved. I stumbled back from the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. I reached for my phone again, my fingers dialing 911 without a second thought. The call rang once. Then the line went dead. My screen glitched, flickering white, then black, then back again. And in that split second before the display returned to normal, I saw something. A reflection. Someone standing right behind me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My reflection had betrayed me. There was someone, something, standing directly behind me. A shadowed figure, its shape distorted, like a corrupted file trying to render a human form. My vision blurred as my mind rejected what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. Then it moved. A flicker, a glitch, a warping of space itself as it took a step forward. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. But the room was empty. The air was dense, thick with static, the kind that presses against your eardrums when the signal is just out of reach. My phone screen flickered violently, unreadable symbols flashing across it before the screen went black. Then, the television turned on again. This time, it wasn't just static. It was me. I was looking at myself. But I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The footage showed me sitting at a desk, a microphone in front of me, an old reel-to-reel recorder spinning in the background, the dim lighting, the peeling wallpaper. I knew this place, the abandoned station, 103.7 FM. My own reflection on the screen turned its head, looking past the camera, as if someone was in the room with him, with me. Then, my doppelganger smiled. and spoke. "Welcome to the next broadcast." I lurched backward, knocking over the coffee table. My lungs burned, my pulse pounded against my skull. This isn't real. It can't be real. But the moment I blinked, the scene had changed again. The static warped, shifting into a live feed of my apartment. I could see myself standing exactly where I was. The same panic in my eyes, the same ragged breath. But behind me, just outside of my vision, a figure stood in the doorway, watching, waiting. My muscles tensed, my throat clenched. I knew that if I turned around, if I looked, the broadcast would end. The last piece would fall into place. I took a slow, shuddering breath. I had one choice left. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything. I didn't check if the door was locked behind me. I just ran, out of my apartment, down the stairs, into the street where the night air felt different. The city was too quiet. No cars, no distant hum of streetlights, just an unnatural, suffocating silence, as if the entire world had been placed on mute. Then my phone rang. No caller ID. I let it ring. It rang once, then twice, then 3 times. Then the streetlights flickered. A faint, distorted voice crackled through the phone's speaker, barely above a whisper. "Ethan, it's time." The lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The world around me collapsed into nothingness, a void where time didn't exist. And then a microphone clicked on. A low hum of static filled the silence. Then a voice. My voice. "Good evening, listeners." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. The sound of an old reel-to-reel recorder whirred to life. I was inside the station. I was part of the broadcast now. The signal was live. The frequency never dies. End of transmission. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. Please hit follow to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next video. See you soon, and goodbye.